Hi there, I'm Zack Kouns on a foggy Appalachian morning in a kudzu-covered deciduous forest, hunting one of America's largest native fruits, the Paw Paw. In this video I'm going to show you how to identify them, how to collect them, and how to prepare and preserve this sacred plant. When I was a kid, my grandfather used to sing this song to me. Where oh where, where's little Zackie? Where oh where, where's little Zackie? Where oh where, where's little Zackie? Way down yonder in the Paw Paw patch. And that's a derivative. Of course, he changed it, the lyrics to include my name, but it's a derivative of the Appalachian children's song, Sweet Little Nellie. So Sweet Little Nellie's in the Paw Paw patch. She's picking pawpaws and going to bring them back to her friends. But the way that, if you know that song, the way that Sweet Little Nellie decides to bring the pawpaws back to her friends is to pick up the pawpaws and put them in her pocket. Well, anybody who's a pawpaw picker knows that, buddy, if you put a pawpaw in your pocket, then you're going to have a smushed pocket full of a custard-like substance. So somebody needs to teach Sweet Little Nellie how to pick pawpaws. Put them in a bag or something, in my opinion. So I'm going to show you my favorite method of collecting and gathering pawpaws, and use this time to talk about a couple of different things. First, we'll just identify the plant, and I want to move on and talk about the ethics of foraging. So first, we'll start off with the identification. This is what the leaves, these leaves have been chowed on by some sort of insect here. You can see they're alternating, and they're long, broad leaves. And the leaves get much, much bigger than this. I would say leaves on more mature trees are sometimes 2 and 3 times bigger than this. So with this plant, I want to talk about how to ethically forage for pawpaws. Okay? So I think we to treat this plant with respect, because we owe our lives to plants. We ask and say thanks for this. Okay? So asking can be kind of a quiet thing. It's kind of a meditative thing. You just enter into some kind of dialogue, some ancient dialogue with this tree, and it's sort of a meditation and a conversation that we're having with this tree. And then if you feel like it's okay to take it, then you go ahead and pick it, and I say thank you to it, because it's going to feed us this very wonderful, nutritious food, this very alive, vital food. And we're working in cooperation with this tree today, because people who are watching this video are going to learn how valuable this tree is. They're going to value this tree and hopefully propagate it. Well, we just had the fortune of actually watching a Paw Paw Fall. That's a very rare thing. The old timers say that the best pawpaws are the pawpaws that fall in the air and you catch them. Well, we didn't catch that one, but I see down here where it is. So we're gonna have a very, very fresh, tasty pawpaw with that one. Another way to gather pawpaws is just to get them from the ground. The nice thing about this method is, more often than not, if they've fallen, that means they're ripe. The tricky part is finding pawpaws that haven't already been chowed down onto. They're just as we like them. Many other animals and insects and microorganisms love to chow down on these as well, and they live here, so they got first dibs on these. They're the first to get here to these. One method to gather pawpaws is pretty darn fun, in my opinion. It's just taking the base of the pawpaw tree and giving it a shake. Here we go, plenty of pawpaws falling off. So one reason I am hesitant to do this method is not all the pawpaws are going to be ripe. Especially in a tree like this, it's hard to tell whether a pawpaw is ripe or not, but it's pretty satisfying to shake a tree and have a bunch of possibly tasty fruit fall. This is one of my favorite things to do when I'm pawpaw picking, really get deep into the patch, because they love these hillsides. They love to get into on these shady hillsides. So you really got to do a little bit of athletic work to get to these bad boys. But this is one of my favorite ways of doing this. So you have to be kind of careful not to snap the tree, because we want our friend to be producing fruit for a long time, where you can just pull it down to you. They're pretty flexible. One of them fell, and then you can, instead of picking them now, if they're not ripe, you can just leave them on there, and you know where you're going to find some pawpaws in a few days. This one's feeling pretty good, so I'm going to ask the tree, treat the tree as it is, because it's a sacred thing. And I feel like, why not? This is a wonderful pawpaw that I'm going to enjoy. So I'm going to show you how to tell whether your pawpaw is ripe. And we have here 3 different stages of ripeness. This one is unripe. It fell from the tree and it's unripe. You can tell by just squeezing it. It's very, very hard to the touch. Also, the flesh inside, oh my goodness, is white. So pawpaw flesh, as you see, is really kind of very bright orange, yellowish type of, kind of like a mango. So I can't even really get into this. In a very ripe pawpaw, it's very easy to get into. So I'm going to toss this buddy to the side here. Now this is a pawpaw, I would say it's somewhere on the verge. I would say it has some off flavors, would be my guess, because it's still pretty firm to the touch, especially around here. And the flesh still has notes of white in it. I'd try a little bit of it maybe, but I don't know that I doubt it's any good. Now this is a ripe pawpaw for sure. You can see the color has changed from the green to a more yellowish, and it develops the black spots when it falls. And the flesh is very, very bright orange. And this sucker's ready to eat for sure. But this was on the ground and had some bugs crawling in it. But that's how to identify whether your pawpaw is ripe or not. And just giving it a squeeze, as you can see, that came apart really easily, whereas the early pawpaws, the unripe pawpaws, you really can't get them apart without a knife or something like that. These you can easily squish into and open them up easily enough. So here you have a pawpaw that's been chomped on by, oh, I'd say a number of things. My guess here would probably be a raccoon. And buddy, I'd pay a lot of money to, it would be so thrilling to watch a raccoon using those little freaky human hands, putting that sucker up there and chomping down on it. Or maybe a squirrel, I don't know. That's more than likely the only things with enough dexterity to eat it like that. But there's a lot of things that chow down on this and love this fruit. Deer really love it. We saw earlier on the path some deer that were almost acting like guardians of a pawpaw patch. They were standing there and they really refused to run. I think they thought we were going to make off with their pawpaws. So a good way to be a steward of this plant is ones like this. Just open it up and put the seeds around. That means our buddy's going to be spread here. So we're helping plant more pawpaws while we're taking pawpaws. Just kind of put it around everywhere. I mean, a fruit like this I wouldn't use. I'd leave it for our friends here in the forest. We want them to eat well as well. They're our relatives, they're our friends, and we want them to eat well too. So it's also a way of opening it up for them. So it opens it up for all the insects and ants and other sorts of things, and probably microorganisms that love to feast on this sort of thing. Now we're going to make a Paw Paw wine later, so I'm going to gather some other ingredients for the wine. It's going to be truly a wild country wine. So what I'm gathering now is shiso. Why shiso grows here, I really couldn't say. Maybe it's a companion plant to the kudzu, which is pretty well taken over. So I'm gathering from this, but I'm helping this plant out by taking its seeds and spreading it. It clearly likes this soil because there's a lot of shiso here. So my way of saying thanks to the shiso is to spread some of its seeds for it. Help it out. It's helping me out. And I'm really just taking from the top. And so that, in a lot of ways, is just going to help propagate the plant. So we're very sustainably harvesting this shiso. And it's going to give a nice minty taste to the wine. So I'm gathering some more ingredients from our truly wild wine, and I'm going to use a plant that's called the Bane of the South, kudzu. I think if we have an invasive plant that is so hardy and strong and loves our climate and is difficult to get rid of, let's learn to work with this plant. This plant grows well here, and it has a lot of excellent nutritive qualities. The leaves are edible, the roots make an excellent medicine, and these flowers are phenomenal. They're going to add a floral note to our truly wild country wine and give it some color too. It'll probably have a purplish color. And these are really easy to find in abundance. So I'm gonna get maybe 10 or 15 clusters for our wine. They kind of smell like grape bubble gum. So they're out in the fall usually. We got them here, and we're gonna add them to our wine. So now we'll get to actually preparing and preserving our harvest today. The best way to enjoy a pawpaw that you foraged is just to rip right into it. Break it in half and start enjoying it. When it's truly alive, when it's truly still living, you're really getting a good idea of how this plant is supposed to taste by doing this. First thing you notice when you do this is you're going to run into a lot of seeds. Larger pawpaws like this one sometimes have between 15 to 20 seeds. And if I had more time now, I would just show you. I usually suck the seeds clean. And I'm going to do a video soon about how to process pawpaws the best way. But this is a wonderful way to enjoy this. But the forager's dilemma is, how do you preserve these wonderful flavors? How do you preserve these nutrients? And how do you make them more bioavailable? Well, historically, we've employed a number of different preservation techniques. Today I'm going to show you how to make Paw Paw Wine. So our ingredients is Paw Paw that we gathered today, shiso that we also gathered today, and kudzu flowers, which we gathered today, and some raisins to add some tannins and natural yeasts. Although all these plants are wild living plants and they contain yeast on them already, so we don't need to add some kind of commercially available yeast to start this wine. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on into the process. And this lime is going to preserve the color, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. The citric acid in the lime is a preservative, and it preserves the color. And I'll be adding the lime, the squeezed lime, rinds into the wine. So let's get started on making this wonderful, wild foraged country wine. So the main ingredient we're going to be working with is, of course, these wonderful Paw Paws that we gathered today. How much do we use? That's the big question. How much do we have? Is my reply to that. What is winemaking? We've turned it into this very specific thing that requires grapes or some kind of easily recognizable fruit. What is wine? I think that's an experimental term. And I think we can redefine that as we like. So this is about 4 cups of Paw Paw. So this wine's going to have 4 cups of Paw Paw. Drop it on in there. That was very satisfying to watch. Okay. So what is in the alcohol? It's sugar and water. Everything else is just bonus. So Paw Paw is a pretty sugary. I recommend using organic, fair trade certified sugar. I'll briefly outline why I recommend this. Organic, I recommend organic sugar, but obviously first because there's not any pesticides on it. Additionally, when we're talking about sugar, cane sugar particularly, if it's not organic, more often than not, it was processed with bone char. So it's heated up to a really profound temperature so that with the bone char, typically bovine bone char, and they're all crushed together and added into this one big mix. That's why you have this unusual looking granulated sugar. It's very white, and it really oughtn't be that white. As you can see, this is kind of a brownish sugar. So I wouldn't want to be ingesting bone when I'm eating or ingesting sugar. Why fair trade certified? Most of the sugar in this country, around 80%, comes from the Dominican Republic, where the workers are treated basically as slaves. So when I buy fair trade certified, I can assure myself that I'm not buying cheap sugar based on slave labor. And I encourage you to look into those practices. Of a lot of the granulated sugar in the U.S., look into where it's coming from and who's harvesting it, because we want to be educated, awake, and aware consumers if we're going to be consumers. So that's my last tirade on that. I'm going to move on to some of the other ingredients. The yeast love citric acid, so let's throw that in there. The yeast that we're trying to gather from the air are just like us. They like particular things. They love citric acid, they love tannins, and they particularly love sugar. Really, the only thing that alcohol is the poop of yeast. Wild yeast, more often than not Saccharomyces, that's the particular kind of yeast that's going to be in here, although we'll have some other ones. More than likely we'll have Leuconostoc, we'll have Lactobacillus, but the main alcohol producing bacterium that we're going to have in here, that we're going to gather here, is Saccharomyces. And it likes a range of flavors. It likes the bitterness of tannins, it likes the zest of citric acid, and it loves sugar. So alcohol making in general is just these wild yeast come in, or commercial yeast if you want to go that route and get a predictable flavor. That's an option you have. I don't like that option personally. But with the wild yeast, they're going to come in here, they're going to colonize this, they're going to be drawn to this. Like the cartoon where the bear is drawn to the window because of the smell of the pie that's left to cool there. These yeast are going to be drawn in that same way to this wonderful little mix that we're making up. Okay? So, and they're going to start chomping down on the sugar and convert it into something, two other things. Ethanol, alcohol, ethyl alcohol, booze, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. The other is carbon dioxide. So that's why you see those bubbles floating up, is that the yeast is turning this into something entirely, turning the sugar into something entirely different. So we've added the lime peels. We're going to add about 15, maybe more raisins. A little goes a long way. Raisins have wild yeast. All of these wild plants we're working with has wild yeast. There's other alternatives to get the tannins from raisins. Oak leaves is a good option. It's fall here. It's getting more difficult to find oak leaves that I would consider suitable. Grape leaves is another option. Again, not an option now for me. I oftentimes dry grape leaves and oak leaves for this particular kind of situation, but I have not done that this year. Blackberry leaves is another option. Raspberry leaves, another option. You can easily forage for your tannins. That's a very easy thing for you to do. Now what I'm going to work with are the kudzu flowers. Talked a little bit about those earlier. They're going to add a wonderful floral note, and if you look at them, they're just beautiful. They kind of smell like grape bubble gum, like the Big League Chew or something. Okay, so we've added those in there. Now we have shiso leaves. This is going to give it kind of a minty herbal taste. So when we're talking about this wine, we're talking about something entirely different. This is a wild wine. This is something entirely different than the kind of things you get in the store, and the flavor, predictably, is going to be something different than what you get in the store. Okay? And we want that. We're working with these powerfully transformative, alive foods just picked, instead of working with things that come from thousands of miles away that are basically dead when they come to us. We're working with wild, living creatures to make this wonderful, sacred, and medicinal wine. The last thing we're going to add to this is some spring water. I know this says Crystal Geyser, but this is actually spring water from the Serpent Mound. I'm going to take some time to stir this. So this is, I consider this kind of foraged water. If you're not familiar with the Serpent Mound, I really encourage you to take a peek at it online. But this is from a spring, a tapped spring, about a quarter of a mile away from the Serpent Mound. To me, it's Serpent Mound water, and I have about 30 to 40 of these Crystal Geyser bottles of water. And I live just about an hour and a half away from the Serpent Mound, so every month or so I'll go and get my fill of Serpent Mound water. So I'm mixing it all together. The reason I use spring water is because it's living water. You have all sorts of minerals and microorganisms in there and things that help nourish the friends that we're trying to gather here. So I'm just mixing in the sugar pretty well. What kind of water can you use for this? You could use distilled water, for sure. You could use the water that has the osmosis or whatever. The reverse osmosis or whatever fancy thing they call that. What you can't use is tap water, most tap water, because it contains chlorine. Chlorine is a bacterial inhibitor, so it's going to destroy the friends that we're trying to gather in here. We're gathering bacteria and yeast. We want them in here because it makes our drink a powerful healing drink. So you can see when I stir this together, got a nice mash going on here. This would be called the must. So this is the first fermentation. There's ultimately going to be, at least I only do 2 fermentations. So once the bacteria wake up in this, I take it up to about 3/4. Once the bacteria wake up in this, I will oftentimes transfer this, well, every time, transfer this to a carboy to age, maybe 2 or 3 months, maybe longer, 6 months. I don't really age my wine a long time. I don't like dry wines, and I want to taste it. I don't think the taste, to my mind, maybe I'm just a hillbilly, but to my mind, tastes don't really mature after 2 or 3 months. They get different, but maturity is really subjective. This whole process is experiential and experimental. So it's based on what are you trying to accomplish when you do this? And there's not one right answer to it. As long as you have sugar and water and a little bit of time, you're more than likely going to have some kind of alcohol. Does it taste good? Do you want to drink it? That's a different question. A little note about this spoon. I like to use wooden spoons, and I usually cut little scores into them because you can, the yeast will live on this wood, and you can start new fermentations quicker. Okay. So I've got it stirred up pretty good. The next step with this is going to be to stir this about twice a day, very vigorously, 2 to 5 times a day, or however much you want to stir it. But let's say at least twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. And you're going to, more than likely, when you're working with wild plants like this, you're going to notice bubbles after 2 or 3 days. It's going to start waking up. Those bubbles is telling you that alcohol is starting to be produced because the Saccharomyces and the Lactobacillus, they're all starting to chow down on the sugar in here, and they're producing the 1, ethyl alcohol, and 2, carbon dioxide. So the bubbles are just a way of saying carbon dioxide's coming out. That's a way of letting you know that it's starting to become alcoholic. I'll let it get pretty bubbly. I'd say that's why I only fill it up to 3/4, because it can bubble up so much that it's coming out of this. You don't want to do that. You don't want to lose any of this precious mix. So usually between 3 to 5 days. I find that ferments kind of inform one another. So if you already have a pretty alive kitchen, if you already have a lot of different fermented things going on, it's going to start much faster. So from there you would transfer it, you would strain it and transfer it to a 1-gallon carboy. And then age it for however long you want.
Some people rack it. I don't rack it. I like to include the yeast on the bottom because it's very nutritious, and I don't think it changes the flavor that much. Okay. So I have a lot more Paw Paw than this. So I'm also going to make a Paw Paw cordial, and I'm going to make a Paw Paw vinegar, this wonderful orange, vibrant vinegar. Okay. So when we have this opportunity with these wild, alive plants, let's take advantage of them. Let's use them in inventive, startling ways, because that's what our forebears have been doing for a very long time. They've been working with these flavors. They've been working with these nutrients. A plant, when it's just picked, has a profound amount of nutrients, and we're preserving these nutrients, and with a lot of with fermentation processes, we're making them more bioavailable. So that's why we've been doing this for a very long time as a species, and it's a remarkable thing to relearn, reteach, and move into.
In the area where I live, there's systemic poverty and food insecurity. So it's truly a shame to me that we've lost track of these vital, living traditions of how to identify and gather these wild plants and ingest something that's very alive and full of nutrients. That's one of the goals of this video series, is to bring these ancient traditions back into our daily life, back into practices. So if you learn anything from these videos, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your neighbor, share it with your coworker, share it with your significant other, share it with your family, and most importantly, share it with your children.